Alrighty, back at you with another episode of The Wrong Idea. In case you're unfamiliar, being wrong is about embracing subjective experience over objective truth. We are not interested in being correct, we just want to explore our own insights and opinions. I'm Jack, as always, joined by my brother Lucas, and this week is our last episode in our first deep dive, which we took into belief systems. We thought that it would be nice for us to sort of look back on some of our highlights from this first deep dive, as it was a new direction for the podcast. And yeah, is there anything that you really enjoyed or found super challenging about this process?
Well, for me, this was a journey that I wanted to take because I think it's such an important aspect of the way I operate in the world. I try to really take into consideration what my beliefs are and how they're operating to make decisions. And that was why I wanted to do this in the first place. And I think that while there are no perfect answers here, the work that we did helped me get a much better sense of how I can use tools to figure out what my beliefs are, challenge them, question them, and then ultimately change them if I feel that they're not helping me.
It was interesting that I was talking with a friend about this today. He was asking me sort of, like he's like, why do you spend so much time doing this stuff? Because I think he initially thought that for whatever reason the wrong idea was sort of like a business rather than a passion project to me. And I'm like, no, I use this as a dedicated time for me to keep myself constantly developing and improving as a person. So coming up with a lot of these models, these mental models, and doing this sort of like personal introspection was sort of just a whole part of the process which I took, and the byproduct ended up being these great episodes which we were able to produce. And I think that my first top favorite thing that we did very specifically here in the entire series was your model of how to categorize beliefs, being descriptive, prescriptive, and evaluative. I thought that was probably like the beating heart of this almost entire series, wouldn't you say?
It's crazy to me how important that ended up being. And it was really hard for me to decide on what that model should be. And I think going with this method of like you have three categories, you're limited to three so that you like have it's easy enough to keep in your head and yet powerful enough to be useful. And this I have found to be the case. I absolutely find myself whenever I think about beliefs now going, what kind of belief is this? What category does it fit into? And it just helps focus me on what I'm really thinking about. It gives me a place to hook in and immediately start thinking deeply.
This is also something that I dug into a little more here, is that this real emphasis of the like fundamental nature of core beliefs. Now it seems sort of basic that core beliefs are important. It sort of seems like, yeah, no shit, core beliefs are important. But what I wanted to emphasize with this sort of next bullet point here is that core beliefs are like good to have and like sort of acknowledge, but the process of identifying them was so like wow in my mind. It was a process which took a lot of thinking, a lot of sort of being okay with, maybe sort of just the way you are, even if it's not ideal. And it also just, took a lot of like literally like thinking in and of itself. Like you had to do a lot of soul searching and a lot of asking of questions, a lot of repetitive things to sort of get where you wanted to end up being.
There's something to be said for being honest with yourself in this process. And I think that's what you're getting at here is this authenticity that comes with doing this, in a genuine manner. Like this isn't about judging yourself or judging your beliefs. It's about understanding them and understanding where you are right now and why you think the way you do. And being able to take yourself out of that place where you're trying to judge the value of your beliefs. It's almost like we forget again and we came up with this idea that values are the meaning we ascribe to our beliefs. So trying to take away the value, you can't give these beliefs meaning yet. You just want to like look at the beliefs on their own ground. Like they're just the things that we accept as part of our subjective truth. And I think that that's for me the biggest takeaway, in that we are just working on ourselves and our truth. And seen in that light, it becomes easier to look at those core beliefs. And what you'll find, I think I found, is that there's really only a one or two that, if you really get down to it, you're basing everything off of it. It's kind of crazy that it actually works that way. I was thinking that there might be like a handful of them down there that were making everything happen, but for me, it seems in the work that I was doing that my core belief actually comes down to something that's very similar to yours. Yours was about, stagnation is death, and mine is about life is struggle. And I think they're saying essentially the same things in the way that we interpret them. But it's just interesting that when we pull everything back to that lowest level, that core belief, it's driving so much of what we do. That was something that I didn't necessarily expect. It's not crazy, but it's like I said, was maybe thinking there would be a little more to it than that. And of course, maybe there is. These exercises are only so good. But I guess, again, my point is exploring subjective truth is a journey that requires you to be as authentic and judgment free as possible.
So many great things there. I, it was interesting because as you started talking there, one of the first things that came to my mind was, "Oh, I'm going to tie this into like your personal truth, your subjective truth," and you went right there anyways, which was kind of cool. So you sort of were able to kill the two birds with the one stone here. But the other thing which you talked about is how that personal truth helps you be authentic. The authenticity is something which ran deep in the identity of this deep dive, and we have a whole episode on that. Go check it out. Shameless plug of our own content, but being authentic is 100% one of the big key pieces in this whole equation, because I mean we talked about this concept of your belief system being sort of an ever evolving puzzle, and there are pieces of it that you're always trying to fit in. And I think authenticity is just one of those pieces that's going to help you you know end up creating that sort of what you would like to be final masterpiece of your belief system. But another thing which I thought you said that was interesting is don't judge the value of your beliefs. And I'm trying to think back because you eventually talked about how there is values have their own sort of piece in this puzzle of you have the beliefs and then the values and things that you can ascribe value to, and how you can sort of put values on levels with other things, but it's harder to do that with beliefs. I thought that was a really, really fun and interesting concept because it definitely made it so that it was a little more of a linear process. This specifically I'm referring to is, getting from how your beliefs manifest into your like behaviors, I think is how we tied that whole thing together, right?
Yeah, it was beliefs, values, behaviors. And the idea being that there's this sort of, I mean, I'm going to use a math term here, but there's a sort of metrical structure on values that doesn't exist for beliefs. And what I mean there is that you can sort of compare which one is bigger, quote unquote, or, which one matters more to you. Values are a little bit more, there's, you can order them. Maybe that's actually even a better way of saying it, is that there's some natural ordering on values. And maybe it's context dependent, of course, but I thought that that was an interesting insight as well, where the beliefs themselves aren't really comparable things. They're just sort of these logical statements or causal relationships. And then we give those relationships meaning, those rules, those heuristics. We talked about them as well that way. Beliefs as heuristics, giving then ascribing value to those, or ascribing meaning to those to create value. And then those values creating a force ranking that allow you to make decisions and act, which translates of course into your behavior in the world. So I thought that that was a again a useful framework, even if it's not perfect, even if it's not entirely accurate. It's a good way to think about what is the difference between values and beliefs and behavior, and how are they related. This gives you some way to keep that in mind, so that when you're acting in the world. You can think through this framework to see if you're aligning your actions with what you believe.
This brings me to a point that I want to make before I go into what my sort of last favorite takeaway was here. And it's that you sort of don't need a perfect system to do this. And this is something that you and me talked about a lot just behind the scenes, making all of this sort of happen, was that some of these systems are most definitely, all of these systems are most definitely not perfect. They may not even be ideal. They might not even be right depending upon how you want to use them. But I think the point is, regardless of whether or not you use these systems in the exact way that we modeled them out, or if you take pieces from them, they hold use, they hold purpose in some way. It's sort of this idea that which I always talk about of like, just take a direction and run with it. If you don't like parts of a direction which you're taking, you can always feel free to sub them out for something new, but staying in the same place with the same old system that you've had doesn't do anything because it's not producing you any new results. So if you took one of our models and modified it and it works for you, all the power to you. Matter of fact, more power to you. Don't just take what we say as gospel. Challenge it. See what you can figure out about yourself because not everybody's going to work the same. I'm sure you and me even probably take a little bit of our own liberties and maybe tweaking these systems depending upon how we're using them or when we're using them. But I think that this is a really good point just to make even outside of this, like specific deep dive is that taking a direction is important when you're trying to do stuff.
You are emphasizing something that I absolutely love here, which is exactly this notion that these models, we're not trying to present here a comprehensive framework of belief systems. I mean, in some sense, we're trying to do, you know, justice to that idea, but right, the idea that our models are going to be accurate or even effective for you, like if you think that's the case, you've got the wrong idea. I so the point is take them, tweak them, use what you can. If anything that we talked about in this deep dive was helpful in teaching you something about your beliefs and helping you take action using it, great. I would actually love if you were to take these models and make them personal. That would make them more effective necessarily because you have to engage in coming up with what that process looks like. So this is absolutely the way to go. And I agree completely that in anything we're doing in life, like pick a direction, and hopefully some of what we've been talking about here helps you do that in the first place. Think about your beliefs. What values do you ascribe to them? How do those rank in the context of what you're trying to accomplish? And then what are you going to do based on that? That gives you some at least ground for thinking of potential actions you could take. But any taking any action at least gets you going. I hopefully you're just taking a step in at least the right general direction. And I think that the whole point is that the tools here are meant to help you do just that.
I love it. I couldn't have said that any better myself. And to round this off, I think that my sort of last favorite takeaway from this series was this concept that we came up against in the episode where we talked about changing beliefs. And it was this concept of you versus you when it is changing your beliefs. It's this sort of battle that you have with your inner self and your old habits against, your discipline and your new ideas and what you're trying to change to. I think we sort of used a couple of analogies to talk about, like boxing and chess and stuff like that when you're sort of trying to, think of these more like strategic and tactical battles that you have. But I really thought that this was an interesting concept for looking at this concept of changing beliefs, specifically because there's really nothing that anybody else can do to 100% change your beliefs. It is really a matter of can you, in your own mind, change your old habits and use your discipline that you have to, be persistent at it.
To say that another way, only you decide your truth. And so regardless of what people show you, the evidence that they provide, they can only do so much. Eventually, you must accept what is or is not true.
Yeah, that's pretty perfect. You are in control of your destiny. You control what ends up happening with you. As much as you can, you should focus on the things which are in your own control and not out of it. I tell people that all the time because people still try focusing on things which are out of their control, and it drives me nuts. But in this scenario, just really focus in on what you can do for yourself, and be comfortable with who you are as a person. Be comfortable with the fact that you will absolutely need to change things about you that aren't good or you don't like in order to make these advanced decisions. If you end up looking back at yourself and you're like, holy crap, I do this thing which drives me nuts that other people do, that's okay. That's perfectly fine. The whole point of growth is just to be able to change it. You don't need to judge yourself for who you are. Just make progress.
So, something I'm thinking about right now is just the power of the right belief in the right context. And I think that this is something we haven't really talked about in the course of this deep dive because we've been focused on the mechanical aspects of things, but I think sort of the importance of the right belief in the right context, and right, I'm using not quite the best word here, but I guess my point is I've found that in every instance where I see someone else struggling with something that I feel I wouldn't struggle with, I've been able to boil that down to a difference in beliefs. And they're typically at very deep levels of like close to core beliefs. Like my core belief helps me build a whole system that's based on very significant principles to me that I've found effective in the world. And that allows me to think very much in terms of my own capability and what's, like you were talking about, within your control and how you can actually impact the world. If you have a belief system that is willing to recognize the responsibility that comes with the freedom to act in the world, you are going to be more effective in creating change and growing, because this is how things work. We are responsible for what we do in the world, and the consequences that result are not always predictable. But if we can use these tools to better understand what those might be and take actions that are effective in the world, we start to look at things differently and realize that representing our authentic beliefs will actually get us further, and refining those over time is what enables us to grow as people.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. I don't think there's anything else that I really would like to touch on. Is there anything else you want to say before I round us off here?
I guess only other interesting aspect of things that I think we haven't talked too much about, but I've thought about in the course of this deep dive, is the linguistic structure of beliefs. And I guess I want to come back to, again, one of these ideas in the earlier episodes when we talked about just the value of putting your beliefs into language. I think that notion is important to think about, and there's probably more we could do to dive into what this actually looks like. If people are interested, I'm sure we would both be willing to do a follow up to this down the line. But the nitty gritty of how your beliefs are represented in the language you use, and how you can analyze the structures of the language patterns, and potentially use those to inject uh, change, or to figure out where it is you need to act if you want to change your belief. Like that kind of stuff is interesting to me, but is obviously very in the weeds. Then I'll also just finish by saying that I I would also like to at some point take a look at actually the kinds of beliefs that are harmful and how we might change them. Like we didn't do a lot of specifics in terms of examples of beliefs and how we could change them. I think in a follow up where we go into the really nitty gritty on this stuff, like that level of detail could be interesting.
I 100% agree. I think that's a good point. And that's also the beauty of the wrong idea. I think that we've sort of created this platform for ourselves where whenever we see fit or whenever maybe the viewers see it fit, we could go back and revisit any old concept that we've had and take a deeper look at it. But I absolutely love that, and I would 100% be down to do any and all of the above of what you just mentioned.
Yeah, I mean the goal here was to give a high level understanding of beliefs, and give you some tools for being able to use them. If I find this stuff interesting and if others find it interesting, maybe we'll be more inclined to do it sooner. But eventually I think we'll do it because it's just something that's interesting to us. So if you have tuned in, and especially if you've listened to the entire series, we appreciate it. And we will look forward to the next deep dive, which we will let you know about when we know what it is ourselves.
Totally not about to go turn off the recording session and go decide what that is. But, let us know down in the comments if you guys want to see some of what we just talked about a little more soon in the content stream. But if you're looking for more Wrong Idea content, you can find us at The Wrong Idea on Instagram, TikTok, and X. And until then, keep being wrong.
Got a thought that challenges the norm? We want to hear it. Post your wrong idea with the hashtag Wrong Idea. That's RONG idea. And join the conversation. Who knows? Your perspective might just be featured in a future episode. Remember, in a world of endless perspectives, all ideas are wrong ideas. Until next time, keep thinking, keep challenging, and keep embracing the unconventional.